listening to The Edge, everything bass fishing, coming to you worldwide from Megaware KeelGuard Studios.
Aaron, I know this date has a little place in your heart, but April 15, tax day, but yet another episode of BassEdge Radio. So we're trying to offset the displeasure with pleasure right here with BassEdge.
That's right. And, my taxes look poor from the fish catching perspective, so I take the tax loss to offset income that keeps me fishing. So that's how I justify all that, Kurt. But as always, happy to be with you. And yes, we are into the middle of April. A lot of things to talk about, Kurt. One of which, as always, is that all things BassEdge are brought to us by our good friends at Megaware KeelGuard, the Flex Step, the first do-it-yourself keel protector, battery guard. All of those products can be found on KeelGuard.com. Kurt, I know that my season got kind of stubbed its toe a little bit because we had some weather that moved in, right? So the first tournament got canceled. Now that has since everything got kind of piled up into one weekend. They put 2 tournaments on Table Rock Lake back to back. But I know as we tape this, we're actually taping a little bit early because I believe you are in Virginia, I think.
That's right. I am in Virginia getting ready to fire off the first BASS Open tournament of my season and fishing the Northern Bass Opens and the Central Bass Opens this year. So we're flying on the James River. I'm happy to have my skeg guard on this body. Shallow fishing 101, it's that time of year. The fish are up, they're in the trees, and these tidal fisheries, man, you got to get back over some of these small flats and get in some of these little nooks and crannies at times, and nothing better to keep my Yamaha protected with my skeg guard. So
yeah, that's for sure.
Thanks to Megaware for those.
I got to throw one out there on you. The very first time I think I ever met you, we were on the Hudson, and you jumped behind the wheel of the Nitro at that point in time. This is probably 2007, and you're like, yeah, we got to make this shoot. It's a title situation, and we've got about 5 minutes to get out of here. And so anyway, we didn't. I don't think the skeg guard existed then, but we were able to kind of squeeze through without any problems. Yeah,
tidal bassing's always an interesting proposition. There's those windows when the tide is right, the fish are doing the right thing, and even this time of year when they're in that spawn mode, Aaron, they'll move up when the tide is high and kind of get on those beds. But sometimes, depending on how shallow those fish are bedding, they'll even kind of move off of the beds, on a low tide situation. So you really got to count your P's and Q's and kind of understand what the scenario is, what the cover is,
and grip the steering wheel a little harder and give it a little more gas, from what I understand. Yes, so hopefully that falls into your hands as luck should have it. Hopefully the next couple of days you see some big bass come into your live well.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to give it the gas and give it a go. So we're excited about kicking off the season. I don't think I've ever kicked off a season this late in the year. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Aaron, what else is going to be a lot of fun is we're going to continue this trend that we started in 2022 with the special guests here in our next segment. So coming to you quick, we're going to introduce, and maybe some of our listeners already know about this, but this is a really cool app you want to check out. We're going to talk with Mike Mehlmann about Bass Forecast. Y'all stay tuned. This is going to help your bass right here on BassEdge Radio.
Nitro Performance Bass Boats. Get pro-level performance with the Nitro Z18, the official boat of Major League Fishing. The Z18, with its nimble handling and versatility, sports many of the features in the larger boats in the line, like a Guardian live well, a heavily insulated cooler, dual 8-foot rod storage, and our smooth and fast NVT hull. Every Nitro boat is laid out to do one thing very well: catch fish. Enormous front decks, up to 45 square feet on the Z21, allow maximum mobility when battling unruly bass, and feature low-profile gunnels for ease of skipping, pitching, flipping, or landing fish. Nitro Performance Bass Boats, pure fishing machines.
Well, as most of our BassEdge community is certainly aware of, we're continually working to bring new innovative bass fishing know-how to our listeners. Bass Forecast has been around for a couple years, but it continues to gain traction in the industry as one of the best apps to the science and biology of bass fishing and making it simple for anglers. Today, we get to chat with managing partner of Bass Forecast, Mike Mehlmann. Mike, cool to have you right here on BassEdge Radio, bringing us into the Bass Forecast planning app.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, like you said, what we're trying to do is simplify bass science and make it accessible to the everyday angler who is time starved, right? They don't have years and years to get up to speed. They just want to have a better experience, and they want someone to help make sense of all this data. And that's what we do. We help them really do three things. If they can, pick the days they give them the best odds. This weekend or next is usually what they're thinking. Am I going to do the honeydews this weekend or next?
Right.
And then the second thing that we added actually a couple years in was a lot of our customers started saying to us, hey, it's a tough day. You got some tips for me? So then we added a feature that we spent an awful lot of money in researching and got a lot of people involved called adaptive patterns, that gives anglers an idea of what's going to be the most likely lake locations, baits, and presentations, right? The three elements of a pattern based on the weather for that specific GPS location. And that's been a huge hit. In fact, it's predicted the outcomes of many a tournament. And we'll get into that later.
Well, Mike, that's exciting stuff. And I'm going to show my age here, but I can remember always waiting to get the next issue of Bassmaster and Fisherman, whatever, and look at the moon phases or the times of day that it was best to go fishing. But now this is a whole new realm of that. Curious to know where the analytics, to determine the forecast and the patterns and that come from. It sounds like a lot of information and technology and skills that's way above my pay grade.
Well, came from a lot of different sources, but let me ask you this. When you looked at those moon phases and astro tables or solar tables, whatever they're called, did you then pray for good weather?
Early on, yes, because I was not competitively fishing, so I was kind of more looking at that, but still would, go out there, grit my teeth. If it was, blowing sideways or whatever, I would still be fishing because I would have to kind of utilize the time, that I had to fish. So yes and no, I guess.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you get a massive cold front in February, you want to be before it, right? You want to be on the tail end of a warming front, and that's going to trump the solar. So we do use a little bit of solar. In fact, we bought a company called solar.org and cleaned up their code, and now we're accurate within 1 minute of U.S. naval position for any location in the world. So that is one feature. But the data comes from a lot of different sources, fisheries biologists, pro anglers, water engineers. We use the Moneyball approach, just about every book that's been written about bass fishing, I've read, and my business partner as well. You guys ever heard of a book called Knowing Bass by Dr. Keith Jones?
I don't think I've read that one.
I don't believe I have, Mike.
Well, you can buy it today on Amazon for a very low price of $315.
Whoa.
No joke. I just looked it up this morning. So Keith Jones, Dr. Keith Jones was, kind of headed up the Berkeley labs for a long time. He's considered probably the preeminent expert scientist on bass behavior, bass metabolism. So that has a lot to do with it. That a bass's peak metabolic rate is, in the mid 80s. That's when they're feeding year round, which is why California produces such giants, right?
Right.
As much as we'd like to produce a world record in Texas, the fact of the matter is it's just a little too hot and just a little too cold for them to be feeding as actively as they are when they're in that comfort zone year round, right?
Interesting.
So unless it's an outlier, genetic outlier, it's very unlikely. I know I don't want to put any dampers on Texas, but that's just the, fact. And Keith Jones writes about all this in his book. And I don't know if you've ever read Josh Alwine's High Percentage Fishing. It actually has the most reviews of any book ever written on bass on Amazon, including any books by KVD, which is interesting. I think it shows a hunger amongst anglers to know more actual facts. And Josh studied 40,000 catches and correlated them to different weather events. Like, for example, the windier the better. It might be tough for boat control, right? But he gets fish active. Whereas when it's glass calm, it's very difficult unless you're really, really expert at deep fishing, right?
So Mike, all of
these
this
that go into our formulas, right? Like proven science. We try to stay away from unproven theory.
Right.
The majority of our formula is proven science, and adjusting for the factors that will get bass more active or less active.
So from the perspective of the pro angler input, Mike, is this basically analytics brought from past historical tournament data, or kind of up-to-date, kind of new angler approach? How does that determined inside of the forecast algorithms?
Good question. So there's two parts. There's a forecast bass activity, and that's on a 1 to 10 scale. You guys have the apps. I'm sure you've seen it, but a 10 is that they're going to be very, very active.
Right.
A 1 is they're going to be very inactive. And that's pure biology, right? Interesting that the guy that owns Private Water Fishing Club in Texas said, Mike, watch how pro anglers pay attention to fisheries biologists when they talk. And that's what makes some pros so good and have such longevity. You know, guys like Rick Clunn and KVD, and we see Alton Jones Jr. as one of those guys, right? They're almost amateur scientists, and they're paying attention to what the scientists are saying and the biologists, right? And the water engineers. And that's how they're staying on top of their game. But for the average amateur angler, you know, they don't know how to do that. So that's what our activity rating does. It basically says, if you were as knowledgeable as some of these top pros that have been top pros for years and years and years, this is how they think, right? They know when the fish are going to be active or inactive. So that's our activity rating. Now, the other part, the part where we recommend certain lake locations and baits, now that does come from the angling community, right? That comes from a mass. What we did when we developed that was we spent about 6 months going through a couple of years of Bassmaster, in Fisherman, Wired to Fish, tournament results, and we made a grid, you know, of, and then we had debates, and we got Alton Jr. and we got Tyler Anderson and other people involved in these debates about, you know, how many bass seasons are there, right? We settled on 9, from winter to pre-spawn to spawn to post-spawn and et cetera, right? Then we said, okay, for each bass season, what would be the top 5 baits out of 22 categories of baits? We had some interesting debate about the categories of baits too, right? Like, is a Tokyo rig a separate category? So these are kind of interesting debates.
Yeah.
And, you know, we came up with 22 categories of baits. So then we said, okay, if it's, you know, if it's pre-spawn and they're active, what are going to be the top 5? If it's pre-spawn and they're inactive, what are going to be the top 5? And we did that for every bass season. Then we backed into what triggers a change in the bass season. It's photo, light periods, and temperature, right? So again, what's the average temperature at which pre-spawn usually begins? Now, as you guys know, not every fish in the lake is in pre-spawn at the same time, but we're talking about the majority. So we did that for every bass season. And then the next thing we did was say, okay, in a typical lake, how many possible features could there be? Structural features, right? Main lake points, channels, humps, ridges, bluffs. We came up with 17 features.
Right.
And again, we said for each bass season, for each condition, what would be the most likely structural elements where the bass would be located? So again, just a lot of work, a lot of research, trying to stay objective, scientific, and not interject any of my own personal thoughts or opinions.
Yeah, no,
you know, this is
that's good
this
stuff.
is how we develop our formulas.
What I feel like is a great thing about Bass Forecast is you take all of this analytical data, these 9 seasonal behavior patterns, the 17 structures, the 22 styles of techniques that anglers use, the passive time frames for fish to be feeding or aggressive time frames for fish to be feeding, and simply the user plugs this, they have the access to this app, and it's not going to feed them just gobs of information that they have to sift through. It's giving them a specific forecast of the top 5, the top 3, the most accurate things that are coming to light. And you guys have proven this time after time through tournament results that you have actually forecasted prior to the tournament happening. Can you give us a couple examples of those that have occurred for Bass Forecast?
Well, here's one close to home for you guys. Amistad, a couple of years ago, Ray Hanselman won a tournament at Amistad in January. And I will forward you that email that we sent out to all of our customers after that tournament, along with screenshots. I took screenshots before the tournament began, and we were predicting that the predominant pattern was going to be pre-spawn, transition zones to spawning areas. And we even showed like a connection zone, a ditch between a flat and a spawning area. And then we predicted among the top 5 baits would be a lipless rattling crankbait and square bill. So I had some discussions with a couple of FLW anglers who were fishing that tournament, and they were saying, nah, Mike, it's going to be a deep pattern. It's going to be winter. And I'm like, guys, the science, the smart science says it's going to be warming enough, just enough to get the big girls moving up. And sure enough, Ray Hanselman wins that tournament on the exact pattern we predicted 10 days before. You know, I reached out to Ray, didn't hear back, but he's a great fisherman, obviously. But he won that tournament on the pattern that we recommended. And Alton Jones, you know, the tournament he won 3 weeks ago at Lake Fork.
Yeah, yep.
All three of his top baits that he used were in our top 5. Every location he caught him in we recommended 3 locations on that day. And those were the exact locational features. And that most of the top anglers in that tournament, their locations and baits also matched our recommendations. So, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to surface. Really, just think about it as surfacing. We're trying to surface in a very simple way. For an amateur, it's a great leading tool, right? For someone who's really experienced the pro, it's a fallback. It's kind of like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, but what's the data say based on the weather? Because that's how they think anyway, right? That's how a pro should always be thinking. How do I adapt to changing conditions? That's the number one regret of all pros, not adapting quick enough.
Yeah, this is certainly, it's proven itself. Anytime we can get shoved down the narrow end of the funnel to get closer to percentage fishing, right, and having success, whether you're fishing tournaments or not, everybody wants to have that tug on the end of the line. And I think using the empirical data, whether you're new in the sport and just starting out, it's a great way to kind of increase the, speed of the learning curve or the height of the learning curve. And then if you are inexperienced, it gives you something to go out and try what you think and then compare it against, what the scientific data is backing up. So all good stuff. Congratulations. Quickly, can you tell us where the app is available and what it costs?
Sure, absolutely. It's available in the App Store and Google Play. It is only $10 a year, not a month, per year. And with a $10 subscription, you get a $10 Tackle Warehouse e-gift card, good on anything in the store.
Wow, that's awesome. I see some premium features that the app also provides. Is that included with that $10 a year subscription? That
Absolutely.
Wow, that's a value that hard to be beat, Mike. Hard to be beat. That's a great value. I've got to say this too. You talk about feeding times and that empirical data that's thrusted into this forecast. And sometimes in my past, I've struggled with the confidence that information is really true and accurate, right? Because it's, you hear of science like, okay, it's a 10-star day, but the activity in 3 days is only a 1-star day. Is it really that activity is that much stronger on a particular day? And I've got to say, I've got a buddy of mine that is a trapper out here. He traps animals out on ranches. And he has a similar forecast for trapping. And this leads right into what Bass Forecast provides for us bass anglers. But when it is a high activity day, he sees more animals in his traps than the low activity day. So folks out there that have a hard time believing that this science is detailed, accurate, it truly is. And Bass Forecast puts all of this stuff together along with the seasonal behavior patterns, the lures, the locations, and it's based on a GPS locator that hits your region of the country. Mike, you've got something that's really, to me, a can't lose.
Hey, thanks a lot. And we actually had James Caldemeyer, who he is at Lake Fork. We had him,
absolutely.
We had him blind test it for a whole year. And so every day he would text me how many anglers, how many hours, and how many bass, and put that into a spreadsheet and calculated the catch rate. And then we correlated it with our rating after, I think he was close to 200 days on the water. Because really, hey guys, you can go out on a 10 rated day and get skunked. And that doesn't mean Bass Forecast doesn't work, right? We don't people that test this short term, that's not valid. Someone that fishes the same body of water hard for a whole year, there's no way that the results aren't going to skew toward our algorithm, because it's like Dr. Keith Jones said, a bass is a bass is a bass, and they're driven by the forces of nature. But anyway, after the 200 days, when our rating was an 8 or higher, he and his client's catch rate was 305% above the norm. When our rating was a 6 or higher, it was 68% above the norm. And when our rating was a 4 or lower, their catch rate was 60% below the norm.
Wow.
Now, he's such a good guy. There was only like 2 days in that 200 days where they didn't get a 5-fish limit per angler.
Sure.
And my take on it is, if I'm going to go out with a guide, I want to go on the toughest day possible because I want to learn.
Right.
But some people that, of course, you want to catch a lot of fish. But, I think that that study right there is an accurate study, right? Because he had no idea what the rating was. I didn't want the app to influence what he was doing or his thinking, right? I didn't want it to prejudice him in any way. So he agreed not to look at the app during this study. And, it doesn't really matter whether in Minnesota, New York, California, a bass is the bass is the bass, just like Keith Jones, and they're going to do what Mother Nature has wired. More active when the water's trending toward 85 and less active when it's trending away, period. Whether or not you catch them depends on so many other things. There could be biological things going on in the lake. You could fish a day after a tournament and, the lake's been beat up and needs a couple days of rest. So those things we can't control,
Right. Well, Mike, I appreciate you for spending time with us here on BassEdge Radio and giving this great information about bass forecasting. And if listeners want to check out more of what we've been discussing here with Mike today on the show, go to www.bassforecast.com. You can read about all the information, plus some more tidbits and some great videos about bass forecast. Mike, thanks again for spending time with us here on BassEdge Radio.
Thanks a lot for the opportunity, guys.
BassEdge listeners, stay tuned. We're going to move into the featured angler spotlight right here after these messages on BassEdge Radio.
This is professional bass angler Cody Huff.
This is professional angler Daryl Gleason.
This is 2020 U.S. Open champion Tim Klinger.
This is Bass Pro Tour angler Ish Monroe.
I am FLW title champion Rusty Selesky.
This is Jason Christie, BASS Elite Series champion on BassEdge Radio. Stay tuned.
Know the importance of protecting your investments, so why use anything else other than the original and toughest DIY keel protector for your boat, Megaware KeelGuard. Grinding sand, abrasive rocks, and concrete ramps are no match for our exclusive contoured edge and patented technology. Megaware KeelGuard keel protectors are made tough and made to stick. Their do-it-yourself installation takes less than an hour, providing the longest-lasting, most dependable keel protection for your boat, guaranteed for life. Developed specifically by boat builders offering the best keel protection in the industry. Also from Megaware KeelGuard, Skeg Guard, Flex Step Pro, and Pontoon Guard. So give your boat the performance edge. Put on the protection the pros pick. Megaware KeelGuard.
In this angler spotlight, we got a returning guest here in this segment of our show, one that has had tremendous success the last several years and is currently sitting in 5th place in the MLF Pro Circuit Angler of the Year after the first third of the season. MLF Pro Angler Matt Becker's in the house. Give us some tips on late April bass, and great to have you back on the show, Matt.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. I love talking bass fishing, so anytime I get the chance to do that, I'm all for it. So, yeah, appreciate you guys reaching out, and hopefully we can help out some listeners here catch some more bass.
For sure. That is the goal, Matt. And as Kurt mentioned, you are off to a fantastic start to the 2022 season. What has been the keys to your success so far this season?
Man, I really can't put a finger on one thing. It's been a lot of hard work, a lot of practice time, and really just getting fortunate and getting a couple key bites in the tournament, and that's helped.
Yeah, those big bites always making a huge difference, Matt. And I've seen a lot throughout this year, a lot of fluctuation in the events, similar to what we've seen last year. You had a great kickoff to the pro circuit in 2021, and you did really, really well in the Toyota Series last year as well. The ebb and flow of tournament bass fishing, man, it's tough to control. How do you deal with that, and how do you try to focus to regain momentum if things are lost, or to stay on a strong path like you are right now this season?
Yeah, definitely. Last year was up and down year, so it was hard to stay focused. And really, it's such a fine line between doing well and finishing, towards the bottom of the standing. It's one or two key bites here and there. So really, you just got to stay focused and stay focused on that next bite, and hopefully it comes.
Well, Matt, our last episode being our April 1st episode, we talked there to Drew as far as keying in on the education of sight fishing. From watching kind of your career, it doesn't seem like that might be your first, choice or a go-to technique for you. So, maybe you could elaborate just quickly on that if that's correct or if I'm incorrect on that. But if so, Where are you looking for bass if they are up shallow during the spawning season?
Well, yeah, generally, especially tournaments, sight fishing is so risky because, somebody could beat you to your fish or, it could not be there the next day. So it's a little difficult to focus on that in a tournament standpoint. I actually really love sight fishing, but like I said, it's so risky and I'm striving to be as consistent as possible in the tournaments. I generally try and look for the fish that are pre-spawn. If there's bass spawning, there's more than likely going to be fish that are pre-spawn as well because they're not all doing the same thing. So I generally try and target those pre-spawn fish.
What kind of areas, Matt, are you looking for when there's a lot of fish spawning? What are some of those key locations you might run into those pre-spawners?
Well, yeah, when there's fish spawning, you can visually see those fish spawning, but somewhere close by, there's going to be some pre-spawn fish. You can back off a little bit, maybe a little deeper, just slide off the shallow flat a little bit or something like that. There's going to be some pre-spawn fish around in that same area.
Are there particular techniques you feel like are better suited? Do you like to, fish faster during this time of year, slow down a little bit? What do you feel like the bass behavior is prior to getting on the beds and as you're looking for these pre-spawn fish will give you the most potential success?
So when I'm searching for them, I like to move quick because generally they're going to bite fairly easy. So you're fishing pretty quick to find a location that has, a big group of fish. And then once you find that area, you can slow down a little bit. I really like fishing chatterbait in the spring if there's any type of grass around, or, if the highland reservoir or there's not much grass, then I really like a jerkbait because, that's a perfect pre-spawn bait. And as they slide closer to the bank, I pick up a shaky head or a wacky rig or something like that and really slow down and finesse them and catch the numbers.
What about as far as bait size? Do you generally downsize or do you find that just, going bigger is better?
That kind of depends on, the body of water or the part of the country you're in because, it depends on the forage. But generally, I like to keep it somewhere in that mid to lower, smaller size.
Matt, when you're working those techniques and that style, is it just because you're going to get more bites, it's going to give you a clue that you're around some fish, or is it just that it's a confidence deal for you? How do you process that?
Well, it's a little bit of both. It's definitely going to get you more bites, and that's kind of always been my style in tournament fishing is just try and get as many bites as I can, and eventually you're going to end up with 5 bigger than average fish that bite throughout the day. So it's a little bit of both. I'm very confident in those spinning rod techniques, so that kind of plays into it as well.
As far as bass behavior patterns and techniques you like to rely on during mid-April, obviously it's going to vary greatly about what part of the country you're in and seasonal behavior patterns. Let's assume for this question, in this scenario, you're going to be in the south, the fish are kind of spawn to post-spawn. How is that going to alter your approach? And since specifically you kind of prefer to stay away from the spawning bass just because they are, especially later in the spawning cycle, much more fickle to target some of those post-spawn fish. Where are you going to look for those, and what are some of the techniques that you're going to rely on?
Well, if the bass are finishing up spawning, mid-April, first thing I think of is the shad spawn. The shad start spawning towards the tail end of a bass spawn. So I'm going to be out in the water bright and early, even before daylight, and I'm going to be looking for those, hard pieces of structure, whether it's a dock or riprap or something like that those shad are going to be spawning on, because those post-spawn bass are going to be right there looking for a quick, easy meal with all those shad up on the bank, flickering around and spawning.
Those spawning shad are definitely a key in those fish. I always, like to get on that shad spawn bite. That's a kind of early in the morning bite. How are you going to progress throughout the day once that shad spawn is complete? Can you continue targeting post-spawn bass situation?
Yeah, like you mentioned, those are some of the toughest fish to catch. Generally, they're just going to be kind of lazy, moseying around. They might nestle up in a little brush pile or a little lay down or something like that. For whatever reason, they seem to really like a big worm right after they spawn. So, you might drag around a bigger shaky head or a curly tail worm, power worm, mag worm, something like that. That's one of those kind of situational things. You got to kind of feel out the conditions and make a decision from there.
Hey, speaking of worms, you made me think of something there, Matt, and I might have to have you retrace back a little bit earlier in the cycle. But when does a floating worm come into play? So often we heard so much about that years and years ago, and it's like I haven't heard too much about that lately. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a sneaky little technique. I really like that. It's like a trick worm style or, a floating worm like that. Usually you throw it in a real bright color like, methylate or school bus, bright yellow or orange colors, bubble gum. Generally, I do that right before the spawn. So those bass have moved up shallow on the bank, and they're just kind of roaming around or marking their territory, essentially. They're building the beds, and they see that bright worm come floating over their head, and they just kind of eat it out of a reaction or out of anger, and they'll suck down that methylate trick worm. That's a good little bait, especially, right immediate pre-spawn and even during the spawn.
All right, guys, this is great stuff we've got going right here. We're going to dive more into some northern aspects of how this whole thing breaks down. But first, we're going to pause for a quick break in action. Power pole down. Matt, hold the line. We'll return with more bass fishing know-how here with BassEdge Radio.
Patented in 2000, perfected over years of testing and real-world punishment, the Power Pole is the ultimate shallow water boat positioning tool. Swift. Power Pole deploys in seconds from anywhere in your boat. Virtually silent. Power Pole won't spook wary fish. Secure in strong currents or gusting winds in up to 8 feet of water. Engineered to take it with a lifetime unconditional replacement guarantee on the spike. Power Pole. Swift. Silent. Secure. Visit PowerPole.com to find a dealer near you.
BassEdge Radio, presented in part by Mercury Marine, returns with MLF Pro Circuit angler Matt Becker in the featured angler spotlight. Mercury Marine, go boldly.
Matt, as promised to the listeners, we're going to break down some northern mid-April seasonal behavior patterns. North and south, everybody wants to say a bass is a bass is a bass, but we really know that, especially with you traveling all over the country, my experience, some of Aaron's experience, it's really not. What are some of the differences you see in this mid-April time frame with northern fisheries that are just different than what we talked about in the first half of the episode?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the seasonal patterns are a little different, in different parts of the country, so the bass are going to act a little different. But, April is one of my favorite times to fish up north, all the way up to, say, Lake Erie. The fish are pre-spawn. They're putting the feed bag on. And then as you work a little bit further south, I'm in Pennsylvania, so even, southern Pennsylvania, there's going to be a few bass starting to spawn in April. So there's all different things going on in mid-April, and it is by far the best time to fish. The fish are active, they're feeding, the water's warming up, they're just in a good mood, and they're chomping.
Boy, that is for sure, Matt. I can remember when it's been 6-8 years ago, I was up on Lake Champlain in mid to late April, and the ice melt hadn't been off too long, but my goodness, were those fish eating up there, and got to fish around Ticonderoga, and I mean, it was just what a day.
Yeah.
You hear a lot about up north. Obviously, the fish go several months without seeing lures. In the south, people are casting at them all winter long, right? Especially, in that February, March pre-spawn time frame. Do you feel like that does play a difference with the aggressiveness of northern fish once you get that pre-spawn cycle beginning and you're kind of getting out of the death hold of that winter pattern? Do you feel like those fish just are like, it's seeming like they'll eat anything that passes by them?
Absolutely. They're stuck under the ice for 3 to 5-6 months at a time, and they haven't seen a bait in a while. So whenever that ice comes off, it seems like they're just sitting under it, waiting to see some baits, and they're ready to bite anything that comes at them. It really plays a big factor into why some of the upstate New York lakes are really so good throughout the summer, because they're protected for 5 to 6 months out of the year, and they're not getting that pressure all the time. So it just makes those fish that much more apt to bite, as they're not seeing baits all year long.
Very interesting. Matt, one of the questions that we get posed a lot on BassEdge through listener questions, and that is trying to kind of pick pros like yourself. What's the strategy, right? When you're hitting a body of water, maybe that you've been to or haven't been to, but what do you go through? What's your process to break down a body of water, and how are you going to approach it before you even launch your boat?
Well, of course, I'm keeping a big eye on the weather. That's probably the thing that trumps everything is the weather. It's hard to fish in, lousy weather if you're trying to fish shallow. So the weather trumps everything. So I'm keeping a big eye on the weather. And then, of course, I've been fishing my whole life, so I got a pretty good understanding on, seasonal patterns of a bass and where they should be this time of year. So, you kind of have a preconceived notion a little bit on, whether they should be pre-spawn or close to spawning or whatever, the pattern might be for that time of year. The lake high, is it low, and then kind of build a game plan from there and find something that fits my strength. I really don't like fishing dirty water, so if a lake has clear water available, I'm probably going to go look in that clear water and try and find some fish there.
You're liable to be all by yourself.
Yeah, a lot of times, a lot of guys prefer that dirty water, and not all the time is the clear water the deal, but you can learn things from that clear water. You can see how the fish are setting up a little better. You can visually see them with your eyes and see how they're setting up, or just see them with your electronics. And then in turn, you could take that information and go fish in the dirty water where you wouldn't be able to see that, but have that knowledge of where they're setting up, and they might be a little more apt to bite with the dirtier water. So you can just use that to your advantage.
Matt, that kind of leads me right into my next thought, which is really, multiple behavior patterns going on at the same time, which is really what a lot of this episode is about, whether it's pre-spawn, spawn, or post-spawn. And you mentioned looking for something that you're strong at, something that you have confidence that a pattern should be developing or working during a specific time frame. If you look for those patterns that you've got confidence or strong in, and it's just not coming to fruition, a lot of anglers tend to struggle to do something that's not in their wheelhouse. How do you handle those situations, and what will you do to kind of adjust to other methods during this particular time of year?
Yeah, as a bass fisherman, you got to be a quick learner. If what you like to do or what you're doing isn't working, you got to know when to pull the plug and try and learn a new technique or learn how to do something else on the fly. And I feel like I'm fortunate with that I'm a quick learner, and I can learn a new technique fairly quickly if I have to. But that's one of the hardest things about bass fishing, is just knowing when your pattern isn't working or what you're confident in isn't working, and knowing when to pull the plug. I generally will do a good bit of research on a body of water, so I have an idea of, some hot baits or hot patterns on that lake. And if my stuff doesn't work, then I might start investigating into those patterns that I've done research on. But I always try and do it my way first.
Confidence goes a long ways, when it comes to decisions like that, Matt. And speaking of which, I want to box you in here and put you a little bit in the full court press. If you had one lure to go through the entire month of April, what would it be, and what are the different ways that you would kind of employ that lure as behavior patterns change from pre-spawn to spawn to post-spawn?
Yeah, one lure, it would have to be, like a wacky rig, a 5-inch stick bait, lunker log, Senko, something like that. You can add a nail weight into it, add a tungsten nail weight, and fish it a little bit deeper if they're out pre-spawn, or as they start spawning, you can fish it weightless, shallower along the bank, and then the same thing as their post-spawn. So one bait for the entire month of April is going to be a wacky worm for sure.
That's an interesting concept. I like how you're gonna change that through seasonal behavior patterns to fish it deep or shallow, or maybe even move it a little faster over some fry or something there in that post-spawn time.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
You can do so many things with it. It's a very versatile bait, and it catches bass from Florida to New York. So it doesn't matter where you're at. They're going to eat a wacky worm. Absolutely.
All right. Today's Nitro Performance Bass Boat listener question segment, Matt, it comes through our Facebook page. CJ Peterson out of Missouri's got this great question. Here it goes. Is live imaging leading to a changing of the guard in the tournament circuits? Seems like the young guns between work ethic and new age equipment seem to be dominating the circuits coast to coast against the local sticks. Will this continue, or will the old dogs learn new tricks?
Well, that's the age-old question there. And, my thoughts on it is it's not the arrow, it's the Indian. So the same guys will win with or without forward-facing sonar or whatever the technique may be. I kind of have the same conversation along the lines of Alabama rigs. It's the same guys that are going to figure it out and spend the time and learn how to catch bass using it. Now, the forward-facing sonar game it's here and it's real. You got to know how to use it. It's the deal once you figure it out, but it's not, you can't just turn it on and you're not going to automatically catch fish on it. You got to go out and spend the time on the water, learn how to use it. And those same guys were doing that prior to the forward-facing sonar, and were winning tournaments then. And once it came out, they learned and spent the time and all the time and effort on the water to learn how to use the forward-facing sonar, and they're still winning using that now. So, my thoughts on it, like I said, it's the Indian, not the arrow. So it doesn't matter what you give them. The same guys are going to put in the effort, and they're going to win tournaments.
Well, and I might add, Matt, and I'd like to get both yours and Kurt's opinion on this. CJ addresses, as far as the young guns and work ethic, perhaps that it's because of we're just now starting to see the benefits of high school and college fishing, getting into the mainstream and having so many more anglers, being exposed to competitive bass fishing. But then also, just given social media, right? The way that education and the way that people can learn and the information that's being out there, I also think that has a little bit to do with, it's not taking that learning curve, maybe isn't as flat as what it once was. Now it's a little more steep, and so the competition is just, getting that much tougher.
Absolutely. You nailed it. That's what you're seeing right now is the fruits of all the, the YouTube generation and, really the internet generation of all that learning growing up and, all that information available right at your fingertips now. You're seeing all that come to fruition now with all the, the younger generation and doing really well in tournaments. It's because, they've had a phone in their hands since, they're 5, 6, 10 years old, whatever it may be. And they've been learning all that information and watching it on YouTube. So that's the big player. And then you got all the stuff for the youth now, the high school fishing, college fishing, even the high school camps that Kurt does, all that stuff is helping, and it's making the sport better, and it's making the tournament anglers better, and you just don't see it till 5-10 years down the road.
Yeah, I agree. And very good question, CJ. I really appreciated that question because I think it hit on a lot of topics, and certainly appreciate you sending that in. And for sending that in, guess what? Matt just awarded you a $25 gift card through Midway USA to be able to go use and buy all of your fishing stuff. They have a huge selection there, but also all things outdoors. Only thing that we need from you is to either email us at support@bassedge.com or simply log on to bassedge.com, click the Claim Your Prize tab, fill out the information, and let us know that you heard Matt answer your question right here on episode 374.
As always, Bass Edge listeners, keep firing those questions through our Facebook, Instagram, or log into bassedge.com and simply click the Ask the Pros tab. You could be the next winner of the Midway USA gift certificate.
Well, Matt, we appreciate once again you hanging with us here on Bass Edge Radio. Keep up the great work on the tournament trail. Would you like to leave the listeners with a few final thoughts as we close down?
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, I appreciate you guys having me. I'm always for talking bass fishing. If I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to someone else about bass fishing every day. So I appreciate you guys having me on, and I'd appreciate if all the listeners go follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and even check out the YouTube channel, Matt Becker Fishing. Got a lot of great information on there, tips and tricks, as well as all the tournament coverage. So appreciate all you guys checking out those channels.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt's always putting the tips out on the social media. I enjoy watching those, Matt, and always great chatting with you here on Bass Edge Radio. Man, I look forward to seeing you later on this summer at another camp for sure, and we'll be rooting you on as you continue to compete on the MLF Pro circuit, and hope to maybe see you in that Bass Pro Tour next year, those top 10 qualifiers getting into that. So best of luck to you. Aaron and I will be back after some quick messages from our sponsors, Bass Edge Radio. Stay tuned.
You know the importance of protecting your investments, so why use anything else other than the original and toughest DIY keel protector for your boat, Megaware KeelGuard. Grinding sand, abrasive rocks, and concrete ramps are no match for our exclusive contoured edge and patented technology. Megaware KeelGuard keel protectors are made tough and made to stick. Their do-it-yourself installation takes less than an hour, providing the longest-lasting, most dependable keel protection for your boat, guaranteed for life. Developed specifically by boat builders offering the best keel protection in the industry. Also from Megaware KeelGuard, Skeg Guard, Flex Step Pro, and Pontoon Guard. So give your boat the performance edge. Put on the protection the pros pick. Megaware KeelGuard.
The PowerPole Charge Marine Power Management Station is the most advanced system of its kind available on the market. It does the work of 3 devices, a traditional battery charger, a charge on the run, and an emergency start system, all in one compact unit. The Charge lets you run your boat's accessories the way you want to run them by allowing you to monitor and control your power usage through the PowerPole app. It automatically devotes power to the batteries that need it the most for maximum efficiency. The new Charge from PowerPole. Power where you need it, power how you need it, power when you need it.
Well, Kurt, always nice when we have repeating guests. Great to hear back from Matt Becker. I do want to make special mention, Mike Mehlmann with the app and the Bass Forecast.
Yeah.
I found that to be, I love empirical data. Let's just put it like that. I like something that we can actually take, use, and really be better for it.
Completely agreed, Aaron. The Bass Forecast, a great platform, specifically as Mike mentioned in the interview, for the pro angler that's kind of been through his thought process. Becker talked about it a little bit in his interview that, you kind of you lean on your strengths and you try to make your strengths work. If those strengths aren't working, what a better way than to log into the Bass Forecast and kind of see some other things that you can maybe put into the program to catch more fish and be successful when you're out on the water. Whether you're a weekend angler just out trying to catch some bass, and following BassEdge to kind of lead you to some of those, or, a tournament angler that's trying to get some new ideas, because things might just not be working out for you.
Yeah, no doubt. And I like the fact, like what you just mentioned there, it works not only if you're starting out, just getting into the sport, or if you're a seasoned veteran like yourself, there's something there for everybody. So, and I was quite honestly very, very shocked about just the feasibility. $10 a year. I mean, it's good night. Kurt, you spend that on your Starbucks every morning. So,
Right.
Anyway, but hey, listen, great episode. Look forward to already going to be May 1st, Kurt. I mean, just hard to believe. We're going to go.
Yeah, man, we're moving into post spawn real quick down here in South Texas. That's for sure.
Yes, sir. And we'll have some more tournament talk as both of our seasons will be well underway, and look forward to catching up with you again on May 1st. In the meantime, I want to wish everybody a great couple weeks. Be sure to get out on the water if you can. Thanks so much for carving out time to be with Kurt and I. We know you have a lot of choices there in the media market. But Kurt, did you want to add one more thing?
Stay tuned to this BASS Northern Open here on the James River. I'm excited about it. First open division event I have fished since 2017, bro. So kind of a change of pace for me. I'm excited. I'll try to share some stuff there on the BassEdge social to let folks how the tournament is shaking out. So I'm excited about this, dude.
Well,
I'm excited.
I'm excited to see how that turns out for you. And speaking of which, I need to let you get going so that you can continue with your prep, both mentally and physically. So best of luck there, Kurt. For Kurt Dove, I am Aaron Martin and the rest of the BassEdge crew. We wish you a wonderful couple of weeks. Be sure to stay on all things BassEdge through our website, BassEdge.com, or certainly any of our social media platforms. So long, everybody.
Is presented by Megaware KeelGuard. For more information on BassEdge or to shop at the BassEdge online store, visit BassEdge.com and be sure to join Kurt Dove and Aaron Martin right here on another episode of The Edge, brought to you in part by Nitro Boats, Midway USA, Mercury Marine, PowerPole, and Transport Graphics.